what exactly is the unit of work that you're doing right now? Is there a possibility that we can automate that work and bring in incredible efficiencies in your operational processes, right? So that's how we're approaching to build a horizontal stack in a vertical category.
Hey everyone, I'm Nikhil, the founder of AGI, and welcome to another episode of Accelerate AI. Today, I'm excited to have Utsav on show. He's the founder and CEO of Kaaj. After having a decade-long experience working in companies like Uber, Cruise, building large-scale AI decision systems for autonomous vehicles, he's now on a mission to automate small business lending. So yeah, Utsav, first of all, welcome to the show. Really great to have you over here. Before we start, can you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks for your time. I think this is great. I'm Utsav. I've spent about a decade, as you mentioned, doing AI and data science. I started my journey in India working for a small startup named Snapdeal, which then grew to be a multi-billion-dollar business. I then joined Uber India team when it was very early in their journey. I was initially part of the Uber India rides team, and then moved here to Uber Eats to San Francisco in 2019. And just prior to founding Kaaj, I was building AI systems at Cruise, so building self-driving cars and bringing driverless vehicles in San Francisco. Fortunate enough to launch that in 2023, scale that to about 500,000 driverless trips. After that, we always wanted to do a startup, both me and my co-founder. So we started Kaaj about a year ago, about 7, 8 months ago, to solve small business lending. And how do you bring at scale AI systems, autonomous decisioning into small business lending? So yeah, that's been my journey.
Awesome. So I think you have worked on two of the most high stakes jobs, right? One is like autonomous vehicles, and the other is lending. That also like AI backed. What attracted for to you to work on these very high stakes jobs?
Yeah, it's a great question. So even with Uber and even before that with Snapdeal, my objective has been to have a very high impact on millions of users. I think startups helped me get to that growth scale trajectory very, very early on. So be it Snapdeal, be it Uber, be it Cruise, or with Cars right now, it's all about creating that impact for at scale, and how we can do that. Now, in terms of building it for autonomous vehicles or small business lending, etc., I think we're always trying to think ahead, like what does the future look like. So right now, if you go to any bank, people are still filling out pen and paper forms, etc. For to me, that world just does not exist in the next even a couple of years, and we want to do something about that and change something about that. And that's the genesis of every idea. Even if you look at Uber, like you had to hail a taxi, you had to uh, you know negotiate fares, etc., and some drivers would reject. Instead of that, you now have a an on demand pick me up from wherever I am, through an app sort of experience in less than like 5 minutes. And those are the kind of experiences shift that we're looking for in the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. That's something that I saw at obviously in autonomous vehicles. Now you see, if you're in San Francisco, you can see Waymos and cruises everywhere in the city, and that's something that we hope to create for Kaj as well, where AI-driven decisioning systems in small business lending are just state of the art, and it's everywhere.
So looking back, what was the turning point when you knew you have to start your own company?
Yeah, so the genesis were there. So even at the time of, I remember like joining Snapdeal, I and my family were debating like which company to join. So we had a couple of offers. I was fortunate enough to get a offer from Deloitte and Snapdeal. Unfortunately, I did not join Deloitte, and that was probably a good decision in hindsight, because I wanted to explore a startup and that high growth mindset. And I thought at a very young age that cool people work at startups, and I don't know if that's true anymore, but at least I would think so. So just wanted to build with and have that high growth mindset, a very high ownership culture. So I joined Snapdeal through that, like Uber, etc. So I've always wanted to be in and around startup. I think it was almost time that I did something of my own. Obviously, I've known my co-founder for about 14, 15 years. We've always thought about starting our own company. And so everything fell pretty much in the right place last year to for us to start Kaj. And here we are, 7, 8 months down the line, building this company.
I think what is the mental shift that you had? So, I have been also for 5, 6 years now in startups, right? And there's a very huge mental shift that you require when you're working, let's say, in a large company like Cruise. Uber is also fairly, I would say, has become now, very, enterprisey level. What is the mental shift would you recommend like, that is required for, actually a founder in their life as well? Because there's a, humongous shift that happens in the life as well, right? So what is the biggest mental shift that's required?
No, that's actually a very good point because until this point, we were both in our IC roles or independent contributor role. So you're mostly leading like AI, data science, etc. Divisions that are separate companies. But it's still an IC role, so we are never exposed to the other challenges that a founder or an executive goes through, especially at a large organization. But for a startup, the kind of things like you have to be extremely scrappy. You have to be sort of doing 10 things at a time, even outside of your core product building. But essentially, you can distill everything down to just two things, which is like how can you build product and iterate very, very quickly, and how can you learn from customers at a very rapid pace. So I think those two are the core critical pieces. I think everything else around that can be sort of delegated away to either throwing money at that problem or not spending a lot of time on additional things. So raising capital, talking to investors, etc. All of these, or doing accounting, or doing administrative work, etc., are just part of the job. If you can restrict that to like 5% or less than 5% of your job and just focus on building product and talking to customers, I think that's the early lift off is very much needed, because you're fighting for time, because you're probably like a 2-person 3-person team, I'm assuming, when you're starting up. So time is the biggest sort of constraint that you have. So how do you fight that, and how do you allocate 90-95% of your time in those two productive verticals? Yeah, and the other thing is, like, as founders, you have to be optimistic as well. So nothing's working out. There are no customers, nobody signing up. You're probably doing hundreds of emails and LinkedIn's and cold outreaches and cold calling, etc., but nothing's working. And then you just get one call and you get one customer and you go from there and you build from there. So it's a very, like, the ups on a founder journey are extremely rare. But the process is very enjoy. Like, you have to make the process very enjoyable. Otherwise, it just feels that you're fighting up against a wall, and it's not a fun process. So just enjoying the entire process makes you go longer. I mean, I've only been a founder like 7, 8 months, so can't talk about like number of years, etc. But that's what's helped me.
Really inspiring, actually. I think as a founder, we really have to wear a lot of hats to all kind of work. It might look very fascinating from outside, founder and everything, but you're sometimes on a customer call. The next time you're on your your code editor. The next time you're working the financials out.
And I think that, like, the very early startup life is sort of glorified by all of the Twitter threads and LinkedIn's and whatever. I think, like, one true example of the grind is, I think very early on we were working on something. The product is obviously shitty when you start off. Like, nothing really works. You're just stitching together something to make it work. So there was one weekend where, most weekends we work, but one weekend in particular we were working extremely hard. I think we slept Sunday 3 4 a.m. because we had a Monday morning 8 a.m. call here in PST. So you were struggling through the product, trying to make it work, and then the customer did not show up, right? And so there it is so frustrating, and I don't think that customer ever, like, anything went through, so they probably just ghosted us. So you just have to live with those feelings, and it's a lot of frustrating experience early on. It's worth it because those smaller things where you can find joy when a customer finally says that yes, this is something that really solves my pain point. I think that's what you are fighting for. So until you reach that point, I think that's it feels like a struggle, but it just helps sort of narrow down on what exactly the pain point is.
Tell me more about Kaj. Like, what are the solutions that you guys building? What are the AI solutions that you guys building?
Yeah. So with Kaj, if you think about small business lending, especially in America, there are close to, I think, 35 million small businesses in the US alone. And the number of small businesses actually has been increasing at a very rapid rate. So in the last 2 years, I think the number of small businesses which have been formed in America, that's the highest ever before. So in the history of America, right? So that's like top of funnel. So you have a lot of small businesses, but the core issue is like all small businesses struggle with working capital. So they're just fighting for cash every month. They're hand to mouth mostly. So how do you run a small business and constantly worry about financing? So access to financing is something which is still a huge issue in America. When we went deeper into this problem, obviously my co-founder Shivi, she's had a wonderful experience solving exactly similar challenges at large organizations like American Express, Varo Bank, multiple other banks, etc. So she had a lot of domain expertise and understanding where the problem actually lies, right? And when we deep dive, the core challenge is basically lenders right now. So, small business lenders in the US, they take the same amount of time to underwrite a $50,000 loan as they take to underwrite a $5 million loan, right? So, if you're a bank or you're a lending institution, there's just tons and tons of manual processes that you have to go through in terms of originating, underwriting, verifying the identity of the owners of the business, understanding their cash flows, and the loan officers or the credit analysts or underwriters, they're just running around with different files, different tools, different softwares, and it still takes probably days or even weeks in some cases to underwrite a simple $50,000 or a $200,000 loan. For me, like that word just as I said, like just did not make sense to me. Like, why is this are these processes like this? And with the undercurrent of AI and agentic workflows, and with my experience in building scalable AI systems, we thought there is a lot of gap in the market that we saw that could potentially impact millions and millions of small businesses. And if you talk about small businesses, like they control 99% of the businesses in America. They are the biggest contributors to the GDP in America and probably in the world as well. And so, from a first principle standpoint, it was a massive problem. It was a problem that my co founder had a very strong experience solving before. And with my experience, again, in sort of AI, etc., we could bring something very interesting to the market in order to solve some of those pain points and have a leverage or an edge or an advantage against some of our competitors. So, yeah, that's how we started Kaj last year. That's the genesis of the idea. And yeah, we're just building towards that dream of making access to capital to all small businesses in America.
Tell me something more about like what's your AI actually does, right? So you talked about automating all that processes, right? So can you deep dive a little, little technically, an overview about what that AI really does and what are the current systems, why current systems are not able to actually do that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a unstructured data problem. It's a huge unstructured data problem. So as opposed to consumer finance, where you can just look at a couple of different data points. So you look at mostly a credit report. In India, that's called like a CIBIL report. Here, it's a FICO through Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, etc. So you mostly look at a personal FICO score and can lend money against that, which means that you have a split second decisioning system, right? So if I apply for a loan or a credit card or anything, you pretty much hear back in less than 30 seconds or probably a minute. Now, in small businesses, there are so many additional challenges because you're not just underwriting the owners, you're underwriting the business as well. So, collection of documents. So, how do you collect their bank statements, their financials, tax returns, articles of incorporation, like their identity verifications, etc.? So, a collection of documents is a huge challenge. Now, once you get these documents, how do you verify the authenticity of these documents? How do you analyze data on top of that, right? So, if you say that, hey, I am running a pizza shop, how do I verify that that's the correct pizza shop that's applying? The owners are the actual owners of that business actually exists. They have a website, they have reviews and ratings, they're serving their customers well. And once I have verified the identity, how do I underwrite the cash flows? So can I look at your bank statements, your tax returns, financials, and be able to analyze what are the cash flows that you have right now? What's the probability of default through our credit models that we can predict? And based on all of this, how do I make a decision? Now, all of this right now in a lender's organization are different people. So there is a sales office which does a data entry or a manual data entry, filling out PDF forms and typing it out in their CRM. Somebody else is verifying the identity. Somebody else is looking at their bank statements. They're using two or three different, probably age-old legacy softwares to do this, etc. So it's a hodgepodge of manual processes, and hence it takes them probably close to a couple of days, or if not more, to underwrite a simple loan. Now, what our AI agents do is basically automate all of these processes. So we have these mini agents, one of them that does application parsing, or that does KYB, or that does cash flow underwriting, or that does financial statement analysis, etc. And then there is a super agent that collates the entire loan package and reads that and builds like a credit memo, which you can present it to an investment committee and say, hey, do I want to lend to this business or not? And how much money do we want to lend? Right. So that's the entire automation. And from start to finish, we take only about 3 minutes. So everything is automated on the background. It happens from start to finish in under 3 minutes. Now, from a lender's organization, what this can help them is if they're writing, let's say, or looking at 100 applications and they have 10 people right now, they can actually look at probably thousands of applications with just 10 people, right? Because now you have the scalability aspect through the technology of Kaaj, or through the AI agents that Kaaj is building. So yeah, I hope that gives some color onto what we're doing.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I think it's like having another the whole agent previously, like AI was starting to work on this OCR, where you would get these documents digitalized. Now then it was like parsing, having a digitalized everything, and then again, like you, as you said, like require manual work everything. Now with the AI agents, it's like quite fascinating that everything you guys are trying to make it automated. And yeah, I think it's been just possible with generative AI having multi-agent workflows, as you were saying. Yeah, really fascinated to see that in working. But yeah, congrats, guys. Yeah, guys been putting a lot of efforts in that.
Yeah, yeah, and we are super sort of fortunate to have had great customers early on. So we have already sort of assessed close to $2 billion of deals through our platform. So $2 billion of deals have been processed or assessed through our Kaaj platform. So it's also working at scale. So we are processing thousands and thousands of applications through our models, and iteratively our models become much better as more data gets flown through our
Amazing,
product.
amazing. I think let's take a step back from from now to, let's say, self-driving car. So yeah, as you said, right, you guys are empowering around 50, 500K trips, per day, and that's like a humongous scale, right? And creating those systems are very different, and actually having that in production is very different, right? So please enlighten us with few of those things, like how you guys took that from a working prototype that is there, and then actually to have on the real roads, with having all those safety standards, everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very convoluted, difficult challenge. And just to sort of slightly correct you, it was 5,000 driverless trips in total and not per day. I hope it would have been per day, but we scaled it to 500,000 driverless trips total. And we were actually the first ones to bring self-driving cars to San Francisco, and then there were other competition that came to the city and solved a bunch of
I've
things.
been to both of them. It's like it works amazing, whether
Yeah.
I was scared for the first time, but it works amazing.
As I said, like, it was a very convoluted problem, but it was a very strong team. You ought to have a lot of data that your models are being trained on. It was so the self-driving world is broken down into perception, prediction, planning, and control. So there are like three stages where each of these models run. There are multiple sensor fusion models. So you have sensors like LiDAR, radar, and then you have your legacy computer vision models, And then there are sensor fusion sort of AI models or machine learning models that are predicting every step of the way. So they're predicting red lights, they're predicting humans, categorizing dogs and cats, etc., like pets, etc. So there are just thousands and thousands of models. So what's fascinating about these self-driving vehicles is the at scale AI models that run. So I think they can probably run tens of thousands of models, if not more. And the latency aspect is so low. So for a human driver, the average latency of our reaction time is, I think, around 400 milliseconds. And that's the latency that you expect 10,000 models to run and get an answer back in probably 300 or 400 or 500 milliseconds, right? And that's why you see that a lot of these self-driving vehicles only drive at a certain speed, because after that speed, so let's say if you are driving at 35 miles per hour versus 65 miles per hour, it's a huge difference because now you have to reduce the latency by half, which means that all of your models have a budget of half the latency. And anyone who's built models and AI models knows that how hard it is to get latency down, right? Even that's one of the biggest issues right now using and leveraging LLMs. What people don't realize is LLMs in production level environment are extremely slow. It's very, very high latency. It's nowhere close to what humans expect from an a machine to answer. So yeah, I think there's just so many challenges and interesting challenges. Now, how do we get from a R&D project to a road aspect from a self-driving car perspective? I think that's a lot of feedback, that like on ground running feedback. So we had multiple different channels. So we had like you have your typical like staging environments and production environments, etc. We used to have much more environments so that we would expose it to certain human in the car sort of environments, and then we would have a self-driving environment, etc. So just collecting a lot of data, writing tons and tons of evals, monitoring metrics. Like we were tracking close to probably 500 to 1,000 metrics across scales, across scenarios, running a bunch of evaluations and gathering more data. I think that's basically how you get to scale, and just exposing your car to different scenarios, both from a simulation standpoint and from an on-road driving standpoint, is basically how you get a lot more data and get a lot more better.
Amazing. I'm also curious to know, like, were there any early mistakes or lessons, you think more AI teams should know about before launching, real world applications in real world applications and systems?
If we are just talking particularly about LLMs, as I said, like extremely slow latencies, the infrastructure around LLMs is very, very nascent right now. So we're just in the very early days of deploying LLMs at production level use cases. So enterprise level use cases have a lot of tooling. So let's say you write a piece of software, it's deterministic. So LLMs are non-deterministic, as you had mentioned, like it's probabilistic. There's barely any way to control the outcomes of an LLM. At some point, it just becomes probabilistic, regardless of what temperatures you set, what prompts you give, what engineering you do. So it still feels that it is non-deterministic. So one aspect is how do you make it more deterministic? Because as users, if it's not a chat interface and if you're using it for some other production use case, you have to build in certain way where if a user gives the same input, it has to give the same output, right? And right now it's basically does not give at 100% of time the same output. So determinism is another aspect. Scalability is another issue. So a lot of these models are great if you have chat interfaces, but they have tons of restrictions on rate limits, on certain other key indicators. If you want to use bigger models, it becomes cost ineffective to use certain models at certain tasks. So model picking is extremely relevant when you're building production use cases. Keeping that cost in control is another thing. The evaluation, like writing evaluations, is a separate sort of vertical on LLMs. I think you've done some great work on that front. So there's just so many challenges in and around LLMs, and I don't think somebody has really solved those infrastructure challenges. So at Kaj, we had to write our own routing algorithms. We had to write our own model picking algorithms. We had to write our own, scalability issues that we are facing on LLMs. How do you manage latencies on certain tasks? How do you make it more deterministic, etc.? So we had to build a lot of infrastructure related work just because there was no infrastructure when we were starting out, especially a year ago. So that's one of the biggest challenge right now. If somebody's launching, it's cool to build like just plug in, LangChain or OpenAI or Claude, etc. So single, it's becoming extremely easy to build a demo in the AI world, but it's the delta from demo to productionized system is extremely complex even now. And that's something that we didn't fully understand the problem once we had set out to solve it. We only understood it once we had more use cases and once we had these thousands of applications being run on our platform. And hopefully that scales to like millions of applications in future.
Yeah, we have worked with a lot of customers, right? So there are few teams which are just developing and they're in a denial that these systems can actually give you, hallucinate and even like how to build reliability. You know what? Okay. And then just checking, just for example, let's say 10 or 100 use cases that they have or questions, and it works. Okay, so it will work in in my production environment. But when they have shipped to their customers and they have seen rapid decline in the usage base, because it's very far from reality what they can done, what you have tested, and in the production. So as you likely said, right, you need a very strong tooling layer to get it from just from a demo to actually having a scalable systems. But I see you guys have done a lot of great work to actually solve these problems, guys. Congrats on that.
Yeah, and we wouldn't like to solve those all ourselves. Like we want infrastructure to sort of improve around LLM, so we don't have to do that work. But yeah, as I said, it's very very early. It's very nascent into this, but obviously there's some great companies building a lot of stuff, including yours. I think on the evaluation framework, etc. And there are so many other challenges with LLMs right now that we can just continue talking about. The underlying principle is like they are just massively important to the core use case. I cannot imagine any product that's been built or was built not leveraging LLMs under the hood. And just because like you have the use case which is extremely high frequency, so almost every touch point that your user has with your product, with your app, website, etc., has to have had a generative AI model under the hood or an LM under the hood. So it's everywhere, it's ubiquitous. So we just have to solve the infrastructure challenges around that.
Great. I think moving from this to, let's say, your financial AI that you guys have built, especially for small business lending. So what are the new challenges did you guys face, in building as compared to autonomous systems? How is it different? As you mentioned a little about scaling on all these things. Let's deep dive into that as a little more.
Yeah. That's a great question. So, from a self-driving world, like the basic principles sort of stay relatively same, but under the hood, there's so many different. Like, it's a completely different problem, right? So, the first principles like autonomous vehicles, autonomous decisioning for small business lending. It's very same principles. You have these bunch of agents solving multiple different things, and then you have a super agent that sort of verifies the work and then provides an outcome. Now, in our case, we were very particular from day one to say that we are not a company that makes decisions on the model's output. And we want a human in the loop to verify all of the work that the AI has done in order to make a financial decision, right? Because here you're dealing with decisioning on lending. So you're saying to someone, "Hey, I want to lend this amount of money and at this rate, etc." So we are very focused on solving for the process automations, the intelligence layer, and leaving the decisioning aspect still in the humans. Because what we found is in business lending, like you're reducing the time right now from days to probably 5 minutes or 10 minutes, right? You're not still using millisecond decisioning. Now, in cruise or in self driving, the outcome or the decisioning part is the most relevant, right? So you can't have a human in the loop making all of the left turns, right turns, or U turns, whatever. You need to rely on the automated decisioning system in order to control the car as well. So that control aspect, that planning, so planning you can do, but control is something that's very specific to the self-driving world and to some of the other automated decisioning systems. AI decisioning systems. In finance, we're sort of yet not there, especially in lending. I think we are very, very wary about compliance, regulatory challenges, about model bias, etc., about governance, etc. So we're very particular. My co-founder Shivi, she comes working with a couple of different banks. Banks have very like high grade data security aspects, model governance, model bias frameworks, etc. So we are building this in a way where we stay out of the decisioning framework and we are only automating the processes, because that's where we see the most pain right now. That's the fundamental difference between the self-driving sort of what models we did and what we did with the outcomes of those models versus what we're doing with finance. Again, it's very similar to like a trading finance firm, which gives recommendations on your portfolio and recommends you, hey, you can buy these 3 or 4 stocks, but does not actually execute the trade. You can go a step ahead. You have a lot of hedge funds which are doing AI based decisioning, right? They're controlling, AI is controlling the entire trading desk as well to make those decisions. We're not there on lending or some of the other use cases. But yeah, we could get there in probably 3 4 years or so.
So let's say, this idea that you're creating is, it's very fascinating. Let's say LLM won't be there. Do you think is there any area where the old ML would have shined, or would have been it even possible with, old ML ways? Right. So do you think like any processes, the still old ML ways applies, or
Yeah.
it's like completely gone?
Yeah, so for us, we are close to 90-95% LLM driven. There are still certain models which are traditional. I would say again, like anything that requires sub-second latencies or even sub 5 second latencies, I don't expect any LLM to get back a result in a couple of seconds or even 5 seconds, right? The tokens per second, even the highest tokens per second that we have seen in the best of models is close to 60 tokens per second. 60 tokens is, I think, what, 70 words or 50 words something. And so it's very like 50 writing 50 words per second is not a lot of output from a human standpoint, right? From a production grade system standpoint. So anywhere where you require a very low latency frameworks, I think still traditional ML is outperforms. The second issue is with the cost as well. So even though the cost of intelligence has come down and it will come down significantly, still there are certain classification models which just perform at a very very low cost environment, where it just becomes, it's a probably 100x differential right now in terms of cost of running. The other thing is like fine tuning your own smaller models is still very complex. So even after doing a lot of these, OpenAI has their own infrastructure, even Azure has infrastructure, Google has infrastructure, but it still feels that we are very early on, where small companies, extremely small startups like us, can create our own fine-tuned version of a model, which is extremely low latency, low cost. I think once we unlock that territory, I think traditional ML sort of will phase out, especially in certain like these classification tasks or predictive tasks, etc. I think that's where we are. But for us, it's probably 90-95% LLM driven.
Do you guys are thinking to train your own, you find in your own SLMs?
Yeah, absolutely. We have already started to do certain benchmarks on training our own smaller language models or multimodal smaller language models, because we need a lot of vision tasks as well. We're very very heavy on computer vision. So that's been happening in parallel. I would say we have a very small team, so the bandwidth allocation on that project is very low. But we are super excited to do that. Hopefully in future.
So very curious to know, like, what's the motivation? So is it just latency or and cost, or any other aspect as well?
Yeah, I think just the control, the determinism of that, and the accuracy levels as well. We think that a smaller model, which is fine tuned on a very specific task, should outperform a larger model, which is just generally trained, right? For example, like just a probably a good exercise of thinking is, can you thousand shot a model? So thousand shot is like providing thousand examples. Can you have a thousand shot model which is extremely small? So it has not even probably like a billion parameters compared to these trillion parameter models, and still get to a higher accuracy level compared to a larger model. So I think, and so these are interesting areas. Like, do you want to rely on bigger companies giving you smaller models? So I don't know if you saw like Gemma 3N, I think is a very, very small model that can run on a mobile device. Do you want to rely on those companies providing those smaller models for your specific use case, or you want to fine tune your own models on very specific tasks? I think that the latter might make sense for companies which are very focused on particular industries, right? So let's say if you're a construction driven industry, you don't really need, you just need the model to understand language, and then you need the model to understand the very specific fine grained context for the construction industry, versus having a very generic small model, right? So those are the trade-offs that are very interesting. I don't think we have a defined answer yet. Hence, we are not over investing on fine tuning our own smaller models. But it's a very interesting space on like who does what and how do we solve this problem. We feel that a smaller model, like fine tuning our own smaller models, would be a better strategy than relying on a bigger company providing smaller models.
Yeah, I think that's the right strategy that you guys are doing. Because right now you want to build the whole system out, decrease latencies. Later on, when you guys have all the bandwidth and everything, then you can put a lot of resources into that. And then again, you'll have a lot of data as well. You'll have a lot of learning to really how these systems might look like, and then build the systems. And again, like the cost part, training that and everything is again time consuming. But you want to be, as a startup, maybe very fast go to market and build something scrappy, as you said, right? And then but that works, right? Great. Yeah. So what's the dream system look like? Let's say, what do you see like Kaj will be doing, let's say 3-4 years from now, right?
Sorry, how many
Will it
years?
be 3-4 years? Just like three four
Three, four
years because
years.
it's
Okay.
it's going very fast pace.
First thing in
Yeah.
startups is to exist 3, 4 years, and then we can think about what systems we want to build. I think if Kaj is still around 5 years, I think we would have done great job by just keeping the company alive. I think that's the first thing. But yeah, in terms of like AI systems, I think we're very, very fascinated about where these systems actually end up being, because as I said, like we're very early stage right now, both from a company standpoint and from a AI systems LLM sort of world standpoint. ChatGPT like launched probably 2.5 years ago, so there's been a massive wave in the number of people who are building models and the infrastructure around that, but it still feels very early when you're actually building a production level environment. So uh, yeah, I think it would be very fascinating to see what undercurrents of AI come. I think one thing that we are particularly interested is how do you keep the same unit of intelligence and have a much lower cost and latency, right? So, can you support a model like ChatGPT 4.0 at probably a 10x better cost and a 10x better latency, or probably even a 100x better cost and 100x better latency? So, one thing that's very interesting are diffusion models. So, I think Google released their own diffusion models. There's Inception Labs as well that's doing great work on that. Although those are not production grade use cases right now, but I think it's very fascinating where you can get like 1,000 tokens per second. And then one of the other companies that's going doing much more on the hardware level is Cerberus. So Cerberus launches their own or host their own models on their own chips, which is this massive chip that's competing against NVIDIA. So we just need more of these startups that are solving this from different aspects in order to unlock a much higher sort of uh, output or throughput from these models. So I think that's something that would be very, very fascinating to us, because what that means is like we can even reduce that 3 minutes down to probably 30 seconds at a much lower rate. And then sort of our customers can actually process not just thousands of applications, but probably millions of applications, right? So that's basically how it would all impact to the final consumer, which is small business in our case.
Yeah. Do you think like you guys will also be replacing decision making after some time?
Decision making, yes, we've thought about that. I think there are certain things, again, from a regulatory standpoint, compliance standpoint, is what we'll need to think about as well. I think it's all about working with the customers. So our lenders, brokers, etc., whoever our customers are, working very closely with them in order to understand how do we automate. If we are automating, what parts do we automate? I think what we have started to talk about is, are there early indicators of extremely trashy applications which are not well filled out, which have missing information, etc.? How can we kick those people out, or at least inform them about what documents are missing, etc.? So there are certain things that you can do right now, even being outside of the purview of the compliance and regulatory divisions. And then we'll get more deeper into automated decisioning, etc., at some point.
I think that's what, like, when you said, so, reducing the process. So I think there'll be a little, people will become, very productive with these tools, right? Because you'll just, probably require maybe just 30% of the workforce that they have currently to take the decision making process very, very fast, because a lot of guys are just doing some manual work, right?
Yeah,
And then
absolutely.
they can have.
Yeah, so one interesting insight was, yes, we all think about how this is going to fundamentally shift the workforce, etc. But there was an interesting use case, or the interesting comment that one of our potential, we were just talking to someone. There was a small bank in a very small. It was a community bank in a very small area in the US. So I think that town has a population of about 6,000 people. In that town, they have three different banks, all competing for the same local workforce, right? So it was a very interesting take from the president of that bank, saying, hey, if I use Kaj, I can up level my current engineers or whatever, credit analyst, and tell them you don't have to do manual data entry anymore. You will up level yourself and start making more subjective decisions, or start taking higher order decisioning tasks. And the reason to use Kaj was basically, I want to get ahead of the competition so that I can actually recruit more people in my bank compared to some other bank which is still doing manual work, right? Because people want to do higher order work. It's just that it's so manual right now. So that was very interesting to us. Like, it's not just about replacing humans, but it's about giving them more or better opportunity of using their decisioning or using their subjective assessment. Obviously, there are certain jobs that are bound to be replaced. So if there are, extremely just manual processes like data entry jobs, etc., but those, we have to upskill them, either upskill them or have provide them with higher order opportunities. So yeah, that was a very interesting take that we thought.
I think that's interesting to watch how, So I think I see that LLM gonna be the, the hardware factory moment that we had. So basically previously we had like just human workforce in the factories to do all the manual work, but then we had all this, robotic automation to actually move that task, and then, humans actually move to the, as you said, more intellectual work, right? So this is, some kind of that shift that I feel that is happening, where people gonna move to more, more caliber job, more intellectual jobs. I think, yeah, ways is one of the and very interesting, use case that you said.
The only additional factor with AI is, if you look at the displacements of jobs, it's actually starting with the highest paid jobs, right? So this is sort of the other way around. So in the sort of the factory moment or whatever, you were replacing low level workers on the factory which are doing, nuts and bolts, etc., like screwing nuts and bolts. Right now, what's happening is you have this dearth of junior developers. Like, nobody wants to hire junior developers because all of that coding part is sort of controlled by either Cursor, Claude, etc., like all of these codecs, etc., a lot of these coding models. And if you look at the lawyers, sort of the legal aspect, a lot of paralegals are getting replaced just because most of the paralegals job is now being done by some of these models, or very fine-tuned models on the legal data set, right? So you have these, it's starting with the white collar job per se, and not just the menial job. It's actually very hard to replace the menial jobs, because right now the current state of cost doesn't allow us to replace those humans, because it's almost comparable. right? So you'd rather have a human compared to an AI at certain jobs, at certain sort of low level jobs. So it's sort of in reverse. So it's very interesting this time. So it feels different. But yeah, some of those jobs, as you said, like probably factory moment, like some of those jobs will get automated.
I think one of the things is, when you have been working in autonomous vehicles, now on LLMs in finance, one of the important part is, iteratively improve your product, right? Having, V1, V2, V3, and going on live and, tracking each of the accuracies and experiments, evals. So how do you approach right now the testing in both of the things, right now as well as when you were working on these autonomous systems?
Yeah, so when I joined Cruise, Cruise was a fairly slightly bigger organization than obviously what we have right now, which is extremely scrappy. But with Cruise, like you already had a lot of systems in place. We were also building a lot of internal tools. You had these massive teams building, focusing their efforts on monitoring, on writing evaluations, on performance degradations, etc. And in self-driving world, what's happened is because you have these massive simulation data sets. So we had a very separate like simulation team that used to generate millions and millions of cases, tail end events, etc. So you could do a lot from a simulation synthetic data aspect. Now, in the so that was how we had solved the cruise or self-driving world. Coming to what we're doing with Kaj, I think it's slightly different because we're dealing with LLMs. As I said, like infrastructure is almost non-existent around the core models. So writing evaluations, one other thing that we observed is writing regression test is super important because you could flip to actually a better model and still regress over the data set because your smaller model was outperforming your bigger model, right? So there are a lot of and the reason for that could be that the prompt was very different. So if you look at the O series, like the thinking models, the way that you write prompts is very different where you write prompts in the traditional models, right? The non-thinking models. So where do you pick up those regressions? How do you pick up those regressions? How do you expand the accuracies or increase the accuracies on better models? So you have this massive system of LLMs which have these traditional, OCR models, prompts, different models or mini models that do different tasks. Now, in this massive system, how do you identify which part of the system is actually contributing to the highest accuracy or is contributing to those regression tests, right? So that's very fascinating. I don't think we have an answer yet. We're still building on that. Um, so yeah, hopefully we have some help from you guys as well in terms of running evaluations. But yeah, that's one of that's actually a very big issue right now.
Help me understand this. So these iterations can sometimes put you back, right? So you need to iterate, you need to evolve, you need to have safety, but at the same time, you be very fast in terms of your development and shipping products. So how are you guys right now balancing this? Because you guys need to ship really fast, but it should also work because it's a financial organization, right? So how are you balancing both the safety? You also said about compliance, right? So how are you guys actually balancing both of the stuff? Because it's really hard for me, I would say, to imagine that.
Yeah, no, it is a hard problem. I think the first thing is like we have an awesome team. I'm sort of grateful to have the team that we have at Kaj. I think it's a very very special team doing extremely incredible things. Especially like we're a 4 or 5 member team, so it's a very very small team right now. So I think it's like there's the quality of the team defines the product, um, and that's basically the approach that we're taking. So one thing is that I think the other thing is just being extremely passionate about what you're solving for, putting in those long hours. There's no substitute to like putting in long hours. um, so I think like those two things can outweigh a
How
lot.
how much how much do you guys work per week?
I mean, it's difficult to estimate because we're sort of always working, and we also have a distributed team between India and here, so it feels like it's a 24/7 run organization, and we want it. That's by design. So that's one of the things. But staying very informed about the changes that are happening in and around. So we can't even miss a week because if you miss a week, like there are new models, there are new capabilities that can be unlocked. There's a lot of test trained data sets that we already have. So how do you build systems and internal tools that just help you a lot? So now you have, Cursor, you have a lot of these advanced coding mechanisms. And one thing that they're very good at is building internal tools and systems. So how do you help yourself be more scalable in running those tests, running those evaluations? I think we have sort of managed to do that. We would want to spend more time and spend more bandwidth on that sort of project. But yeah, that's like having a great team, being very curious, putting the long hours, staying informed about what's happening around. I think those are probably the critical pieces. How we are tackling it right now. But yeah, I'm not sure what would happen if Kaj were to be like a 50% or 100% organization. I think you might have different checks and balances at that level.
Yeah. Think you guys will have that. You'll reach that, 50 probably very soon. All the
I
best,
hope
guys,
not.
for that.
I hope to stay extremely lean, because managing people, like just having a bunch of people, is just it's not great for scale. And I think like the more LLMs are put into work, especially in our systems, I think the lesser people that you actually require. And one person will now do a lot more ownership driven task compared to like I don't think there's a requirement where you have a very specific front end engineer now, or a very specific like distributed database engineers, etc. I think that, like the world is becoming more full stack because you're controlling end to end, and that's how engineers, like, they actually want to do this. Like they actually want to own the entire stack, um, right from building writing the first piece of code and talking to customers and iterating on the product and building AI pipelines, etc.
Yeah, I also see the same thing. We also have the tech team is very lean. And that's hardly you can actually, make the speed in the team as like it's just like backlog and backlog, and you'll have more managerial hours than actually building the things. But I think that's a great path that you guys are going. Okay, I think one of the things that you guys are working so much on LLM, what are the few features that you think, that you want in LLM to do, or where they are, falling short of currently?
Yeah, I mean, we are both extremely passionate about these AI models. And second, like we crib a lot. So you've seen me crib about latencies, about accuracies, etc. So it still feels like the limit to intelligence hasn't been pushed yet. Um, so you're talking about like these O3 level models or thinking models, even search experiences. I think it's a completely new paradigm across the entire stack. Now, there are tons of issues with this, especially when you're selling a software to an enterprise grade um, company like a Fortune 500 or a Fortune 1000. I think it's a very different conversation than building something for startups or building something for very sort of consumer businesses or chat experiences, etc. So it's how do you move the intelligence to doing higher order task and the challenges that come up with that. So scalability, reliability, determinism, latency, cost. There are so many different factors, evaluations, regressions, etc. Testing, monitoring. There's just too many aspects in and around LLMs. They're just yet to be figured out, right? And everybody is trying to figure it out, right? So it's yeah, I mean that those are a lot of challenges, but as I said, like it is the current and the future. Like there's absolutely no way that you can build a product without any sort of LLM use.
I think it's a moving target. So let's say, you guys are building something on LLM stack and everything. And it's so, there might be a new release from OpenAI which says, this problem is being solved from Gemini and Google, okay, now you can you can do this. You don't need to build something on that own. For example, image creation that has become very, you don't have to train your own diffusion models now. You can just superimpose two images, and now it's people who have been working to train these models, you know, um, you could actually just use OpenAI endpoints and Google Gemini endpoint to actually just build for on the application stack rather than the foundation stack. So how do you guys are taking, for example, technical decisions on what are the problems that you need to solve right now, uh, currently, which might not be solved, by OpenAI and something in the future? How you're taking your technical decisions on building out and solving. You said a lot of problems, right? But how do you tackling, how you're choosing which one to solve, which one to not to solve currently?
Yeah, no, the great question. I think one, I think famous saying from Paul Graham or somebody is like, follow your customers and everything else will follow. So we just love talking to customers, and we just do that day in and day out. Now they try what the problem that we're trying to understand from them is, even if it takes you 5 minutes of your time or like 30 seconds of your time, what exactly are you doing on that, right? Are you just browsing on the web? Are you opening up a document? Are you interacting with your CRM systems? Are you talking on the phone? What exactly is the unit of work that you're doing right now? Is there a possibility that we can automate that work and bring in incredible efficiencies in your operational processes, right? So that's how we're approaching to build a horizontal stack in a vertical category, right? So the category is basically small business lending. The horizontal product is how do you get from the first touch point of your customers to a decision, right? So it's a very horizontal product. I think the companies which are focused or have been focused on a single feature, so the earlier stack used to be, hey, be incredibly good at one thing and just scale that and distribute it and focus on distribution. I think that's very hard to do nowadays in vertical industries. So if you're solving something for like a medical industry or a health industry or financial industry, like even niche within that, you need to have multiple features or multiple products that are solving a much more horizontal problem than a very particular or an API driven company, basically, right? So that's the approach that we are taking. What's the unit of work that we can replace, right? If the unit of work is like 100 hours of work, what are the units of work that Kaaj can actually replace through multiple agents? Now, the tools that we have currently may augment that. So you can say, hey, something that Kaj built, I don't know, 3 months ago with a pipeline where you had, 5 different mini agents doing these 10 different things and coming up with an answer, has now been replaced by a much larger model like a Gemini 2.5 or whatever. Right? So you can replace a lot of the horizontal features that we are building by a larger model that can come, or a newer model that's much better on efficiency and scale and accuracies. So that could happen, but then we would have already moved on to building more units of work and converting more units of work into our Kaj and bringing that into our Kaj pipeline. And one other thing that we are very focused on, and this is a very different take than some of the other players in the industry. So you have had in the past, especially in SaaS businesses, the use case of orchestration layers. So these orchestration layers are basically pulling in multiple different APIs, pulling that into your platform, using some sort of business rules and coming up with a decision, and then and focusing more on distribution. Our take on this is like, we don't want to be an API, we don't want to be an orchestration layer. If we are an orchestration layer, we would orchestrate our own models and not somebody else's APIs, right? So that's the slightly different approach that we're taking. We might be wrong in the long run, but that just feels right from a owning the entire stack perspective. So that's a very so the ethos of that are driven by where we have worked. So if you look at Uber, if you look at Cruise, they control probably 90% of their stack, right? So Uber's built potentially everything in house that you could think of. At some point, like even stupid things like owning your own chat experience, right? So internal company chat experience, there was a different product that Uber had built internally, which made no sense. But that's just the ethos of owning and building your own stack. I think that's the ethos of the company at Kaj as well. So we want to own the entire stack that we are building and build a much more horizontal product with multiple features and replacing those unit of work that a credit analyst or an underwriter does right now.
Very interesting day, I think. Those actually, as I said, they came from Uber, where they were developing everything. Um, yeah, I think very interesting. So for let's say for AI engineers looking to move into high stakes areas like finance, healthcare, autonomous vehicle, so what type of mindset do you think they need to have, to work in these jobs?
Yeah, I think one of the mindset shifts um, is the high ownership mindset that you have to bring in an area where it's actually impacting people. So let's say finance or self-driving is probably the closest that impacts the people in and around you. So not just the people who are sitting in your car, but also the people who are around in and around your car. So it's a very high responsibility, high ownership job. It also gives a lot of meaning in life as well. So like if you're looking to solve harder problems, that's basically like that's the passion that any engineer should have. I mean, now I don't think there is any engineering without AI. So I think we should stop calling them AI engineer. Every engineer is just an AI engineer now. So it's just having that mindset of high ownership and high responsibility in those tasks. But so yeah, that comes at a cost of like you can't chill at jobs, and like you can't shut your laptop off after 2 p.m. or 3 p.m., whatever it used to be at Google or Facebook at some point. So yeah, that's those are like the trade-offs.
What do you think is the most underrated skill that the engineers today should have, in this AI Gen AI era?
I think the raw passion to understand systems is sort of underrated. The So what's happening now, and we are seeing this trend as well, especially as we start recruiting, junior developers or even senior engineers. There's this trend of relying a lot on the coding tools, etc., which is great. So even like probably 70-80% of our code base is written by AI at Kaj. That's going to increase to probably 95-97% in the future, right? So there's no question about that AI is going to write most of your code. Now the issue is not AI writing your code and running sort of the software engineering for you. The challenge is your engineers not understanding what the AI has written and not being able to debug or understand the systems that we have created under the hood. And that's one of the most underrated sort of qualities of an engineer right now is how do you think through a problem? How do you understand your own systems? I think those two are the most critical pieces. With that, I think just general advice to anyone is basically have a very high ownership. And if you don't feel that your current role gives you that ownership, move to a role where that gives you more ownership. Right? Because like having ownership at a very young age does wonders to your learning curve, and that's how basically you learn, right? So I think there's a tweet by someone which said if you put an intern in a staff level engineer position, the intern will start behaving like a staff engineer, right? So even if they don't have necessary skill set, just putting people in those high responsibility, high ownership um, roles, that's the way that you can increase your learning curve. So I think any engineer who wants to do that, that would be a great uh, learning for them.
I'm sure you had a lot of learning in your past 1 year when you started Kaaj, and the learning would have been exponential, right? Then you might have. I don't like, so when I the first year of mine was like the 1 year is like 3 or 4 years probably working, in an enterprise, maybe
Oh,
5 years
much
because
more than that.
you
Yeah.
right. So, what are the few things that you think that you might have known or learned before,
Yes.
before starting Kaj?
I think the first thing is like what a lot of people don't know is like being a founder is an extremely shitty job. Some parts of it is just plain nonsense. So in terms of learnings, there are learnings which there are certain areas which I want to get improved on. There are certain areas which I absolutely don't care. I don't want to allocate any of my bandwidth or time on those things. So there are some good learnings, and there are some learnings which add no value to your life, right? In terms of learnings, like what we would have known in the past, again, is being extremely customer obsessed. So even more obsessed than sort of we are. I think just following and learning more about those use cases, spending more time with our customers. I think that's probably the biggest learning, because what happens is when you start thinking about AI models, engineering, how do you solve particular problems, etc., you can sort of get very romanticized about this idea of building something rather than focusing on what the actual pain points are, right? So the engineer or the person who's building the product has to be very close to the person who's using the product or who's feeling the pain. And I think iterating extremely fastly about what the pain point is, just talking to more customers, spending more time with customers, etc., that just helps. So I think, like, even initially we had spent some time, like any time that you spend on building the product, if you can just spend slightly more time talking to more customers, I think that's one of the big learnings. The other learnings is for semi-technical founders like us. So both of us had an AI background or data science background. We were neither core software engineers, neither sales or marketing, etc. So we are sort of semi-technical. For any semi-technical or technical founders, extremely important to learn how to talk to people, right? And that's something that we never are accustomed to do, especially if you're in a IC role. So how do you just talk to people and build that rapport so that they open up about their pain points, etc. So I think that's something that we are still learning. My co-founder Shivish is much better than on that than I am. But yeah, I think those are a few skills that we have gotten better. But I would say I'm still probably 25th percentile in probably talking to people and talking to customers or new customers, etc. So I would like to get myself improved to probably at a P50 or P75 on that.
Awesome. I think we are mostly close to our the session. Probably, I will ask you a few very quick questions, two, three questions, and yeah. So, what is the one trend that you're really excited about in AI?
One trend, all things related to AI, like we're very fascinated, super bullish about this. uh, there are a couple of trends. I think what I mentioned was like the diffusion models are extremely cool. Some of the work that Cerebras is doing is very, very cool. Anything that feels more human, feels more, I had to say, like, LLMs almost need to feel the same as older tech or older software. They have to get back an answer in milliseconds. They have to be extremely cost effective, very high accuracy, extremely deterministic. I think any company that's solving that, or any infrastructure related work that's solving that, is very valuable in the industry. To that extent, I think diffusion models are super relevant. I think one thing that I'm super excited, because I consume a lot of content, I'm a huge movie buff, is video models. I think the current video models are just amazing. I think it will give a new meaning to filmmaking, to sort of creating characters, creating games, creating those new experiences for users. I think that's a whole different world that we haven't even explored. So I think that's one of the trends that I'm super bullish and excited about from a personal level as
You
well.
probably touch everything that is coming new. Yeah, but it's a really exciting times. New things are coming. Yeah, let's see what are the new things that unfolds this year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any favorite tools? Any favorite AI tools that you currently cannot live without?
Oh, can't live without. Yeah, I mean, OpenAI has become probably the go-to. Clouds become the go-to. So I don't think there's any word without those tools. Perplexity, obviously we share common investors, so we use a lot of Perplexity as well. Yeah, I think those tools are yeah, that's just a bread and butter right now. I think what I love about is like just brainstorming about different things with thinking models. I think O3, etc. So you give it a task and you just let it think over for 7, 8, 10 minutes. I think that's fascinating, and I think the new Claude capabilities are you can let the model think for like hours on a problem. So I think those are fascinating.
Funniest or the weirdest fail that you had in production?
Oh, fail on LLMs?
Yeah, means in
Yeah, that
LLMs.
happens all the time. I think one of the issues is just models regurgitating spaces, like trailing spaces. So some randomly, it will just keep typing spaces at the end. It will not conform to even the JSON objects, etc. So I think that's not it's not a recurrent issue, but it's recurrent enough that it's not rare. So yeah, I think it's pretty funny that like you ask it to give someone in a JSON structure and it just gives you a bunch of white spaces. This we observed when I think OpenAI moved to a new 4.0 model. I think it keeps happening on Gemini. Gemini, for some reason, feels extremely constrained, uh, even on like some of the internal compliance things and safety tools that they have built. I don't think their safety tools are sort of close to the accuracy that we need. So even simple questions, it would just deny, giving back an answer to. So I think that's one of the issues.
Cool. I think I have also seen very weird production issues. So what happened was we were deploying, action recognition task for crime in my first startup, and we took like 6 months, like very small startup. We hired a bunch of data annotators. We deployed in production, and there's this one guy who was goofing around and type of dancing, and it recognized that as fighting because we didn't had that in our data set, the dancing data sets. And the closest that it could get was fighting, right? It's learning. So this was in 2020. So models have become fairly good now. So yeah, I think failures in production is it's quite normal. Yeah, so it's great to talk to you today. Got to learn, got to know about lot of things today, and I think our viewers as well. Anything that you want to share in your closing notes?
No, I think it was fascinating conversation. Thank you so much. It also helps me think through how we have solved problems, where we need to go. So it's a great learning experience as well for us because we don't really get time to think about things, like take a step back and think about things holistically. So I think from that perspective, this was great. So yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for hosting, and yeah, hope you have a great time.
Yeah, thanks. It's